What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to the YouTube channel, All Things Cinema. I have some very exciting news for y'all, and it's all about this brand new camera that I'm filming the channel with right now. Let's get into it. Alright, y'all, so if y'all seen the thumbnail, you already know what camera it is that I'm filming this video with right now. Not only that, but I actually purchased this camera. This is my very own camera. I did not rent it, and it's my first Canon EOS cinema camera, and it is the Canon R5C EOS cinema camera. I'm excited about this camera. I've owned it now for about 2 months, and I've already filmed my first big wedding with it, about 1 or 2 interviews with it. So I have a lot to say about this camera. Not only that, but my experience is coming from a video production review. I'm also a photographer as well. Hence, one of the reasons why that led me to purchasing this camera. I'm going to talk more about that a little bit later. But what I do is video production. My company is based here in Maryland, Baltimore area. I do a lot of documentary. I do a lot of interviews, promotional videos, commercials, and wedding videography. You are going to be getting a seasoned experience review with this camera. I will create some chapters down below for this video, so you can actually jump ahead to content that you actually want to listen to and find out about this camera more specifically. Feel free to jump ahead by looking at the chapters for this video. Why did I purchase the Canon EOS R5C and leave my Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K Pro as my A camera for my video production company? So I was getting back into my production with photography, and so instead of having the 6K Pro and then another expensive flagship photography camera, I wanted to look in the market to see, was there a actual cinema camera that also was a photography camera? Not a hybrid camera, a cinema camera that also was a flagship and do really good with photography. First camera that came to my mind was the Sony A1. Now that camera is $6,000, so that was a no-go for me. Panasonic S52X. That camera is only $2,200. Is really worth $3,000. Has really good specs. Now, the other option was this more expensive camera that was in the Canon EOS cinema lineup called the R5C, okay? And it is pretty much Canon's flagship photography camera like the R5, but it's the cinema version. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But this camera, the R5C, the beginning of 2024, was going for $4,300. Now, I looked back on the market on bnhphotovideo.com around March, and I saw that Canon did something I haven't seen them do before. They dropped their price on this camera about $700 from $4,300 to $3,600. Now, that for me was a big boost because it was now more in buying range for me, as my budget did not allow for a $4,300 cinema camera. All right, so I'm gonna go down the list of the specs of this Canon EOS R5C because there's so many. As you see, I have a cheat sheet here, right here, that I wrote down all the specs. I might even still miss some, but and this also will help you to know like how and why this Canon EOS R5C is very much future-proof even now in 2024, and I would say beyond, okay? I'm talking about the Canon EOS R5C being 1 year newer than its bigger brother, the C70 and the C300 Mark III, spec-wise and experience-wise, it's much more worth than the C70 and the C300 Mark III, even though the Canon EOS R5C is cheaper than both of those cameras. First thing up is that it's a cinema camera. Also, it's an 8K full frame cinema camera that is also a flagship 45 megapixel photography camera of Canon. Okay, 8K resolution sensor that gives you oversample 4K. Not only that, but you can actually shoot 8K in this camera up to 30p in MP4 format or MXF format, and you can shoot up to 8K 60p in RAW. I mean, that right there, we'll talk about the processor in this camera a little bit later, but that right there is astounding for this 2-year-old camera, and even in 2024. Internal RAW, okay, that has 8K internal RAW, 24p, 30p, and 60p. Not only that, but none of the 8K RAW is even cropped. This is full frame 8K cinema video that you're getting out of this camera with no crop. It has proxy recording, which I love the proxy recording. My Blackmagic Pocket 6K Pro did not have any proxy recording. In the 2 years that I owned the camera, I didn't even really know about proxy recording until I looked out and saw the C70, C300 Mark III. So proxy recording is so awesome, especially when you're shooting in RAW. This processor allows you to shoot 8K RAW and simultaneously creates proxies that you can send to the second media card, which is the SD card, at the same time. If you create proxies in DaVinci Resolve or Adobe Premiere, it's going to take a few hours. 4K 120 slow motion. Okay, now again, my 6K Pro, the fastest rate, it was 6K Super 35 sensor with 6K internal RAW, which is awesome, but the fastest rate that camera can put out was 50p, 50 frames per second. Not too many cameras have 4K 120, first of all. The FX3 has it, Canon's higher C70, C300 Mark III has it, and then Panasonic, the GH6 had it, but not the S52X. So I wanted 4K 120 because I wanted that extra slow motion, especially for weddings and for filmmaking. The Canon EOS R5C has 4K 120. Not only that, but the 4K 120 is not crippled or cropped. We're talking about 4K 120p with no crop. This is still in full frame. It doesn't crop down to Super 35. Not only that, but you can still shoot 4K 120p, and the XF ABC all intra frame rate give you the highest bit rate, and you can shoot that in 4K 120p. Not only that, but you can still have autofocus. Again, we're talking about the processor that is in this camera, which is outstanding. The Canon EOS R5C is in this mirrorless body style compared to his bigger brother, the C70, which is really in like a DSLR body size. And then you have the bigger brother, the older brother, the C300 Mark III and the C500, which are in the full-size ENG cinema camera body styles. This guy being in a mirrorless body style, still full frame with this 8K sensor in it, you're getting that more shallow depth of field. Again, this is coming from the Super 35 that I had in the 6K Pro. I'm getting more shallow depth of field. I'm getting better low light. It's full frame. The sensor had bigger photo sites, better low light, less noise than the Blackmagic. Everybody know who has a Blackmagic. It's a little bit noisy in the ISOs. I rarely use 6,400 ISO in my Blackmagic. 6,400 in this R5C 6400 ISO, and this R5C is clean. We'll talk about that a little bit later about noise reduction. We'll talk about the Canon color science. I always hear people talking about the Canon color science, and Blackmagic, the image coming out of that 6K Pro is amazing, okay? I got a lot of good remarks from my clients about the picture coming out of that 6K Pro. However, the Canon EOS R5C, I can see what everybody's talking about with the color science. I really love it. It's so natural. And then we're talking about the dynamic range, okay? Now, there's no really upgrade for me in the dynamic range department with the EOS R5C compared to my last camera, the Blackmagic Pocket 6K Pro. The 6K Pro had 13 stops of dynamic range. The R5C has 13.6 stops of dynamic range based off a Gerald Undone video. You can check out his review on the Canon R5C. He did a, he does the technical test, and he actually used the Xylo, exposure dynamic tool, and he's seen a full range of 13.6 stops of dynamic range in C-Log 3. And out of that you can get a clean 12.1 stops with no noise. Okay, so 13.6 stops of dynamic range. It's about the same as my 6K Pro. I'm happy. Longest is not less. I really wanted 14 stops or more. Now, the Panasonic S52X does have about 14 or 14 plus stops of dynamic range. But for me, 13 is the minimum. 13, you really, in a cinema camera, 13 stops is like the minimum. So I'm happy. Now, professional tools that this camera give you, again, we're talking about the processor, okay? The processor, many people don't talk much about the processor, even though the manufacturer does, when you read about the camera. But again, the processor allows all of this professional stuff to be done. You're getting tools like shutter angle and all of the EOS lineup. Shutter angle, I keep it on shutter angle, and I keep it at 180 degrees. So if I'm shooting 24p, it's at the proper motion blur. And if I'm going up to 4K 120 for that super slow motion, I don't have to change anything. I'm getting that perfect motion blur with no sacrifice. We talking about false color. I have false color in my 6K Pro, but really only cinema cameras really have false color. Now, take note, Sony didn't have false color, so we'll talk more about that in the comparisons, okay? Waveforms. I love waveforms. Have zebras. Now, I also have 2 zebras, okay? Focus peaking. Focus peaking, like, I manual focus a lot. And focus peaking is definitely important. I had that in my 6K Pro. The 6K Pro actually have a little bit better focus peaking, but focus guide, and you get that with the autofocus lenses, with the RF mount or EF, but you do get focus guide is when you want to manually focus with an autofocus lens. This camera, again, the processor allows you to use focus guide, which is another exposure tool, just like focus peaking, and I love it. You get clear scan. It reminds me of Panasonic's synchro scan. Clear scan allows you to find a frequency that that detects flicker with any house lights, and it just helps you select a frequency just to kind of get rid of that flicker. So I love clear scan. Is for the win. This camera also have EIS. Now, it does not have 5-axis image or IBIS. It does not have in-body image stabilization, but it does have something called electronic image stabilization. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of it, but the fact that this camera has it is better than nothing, because I do use it sometime. We could talk about that a little bit later, but it's awesome that it has that. I had the 6K Pro with straight raw cinema camera, no autofocus, no stabilization, no auto, nothing. And I'm used to that. So dual pixel autofocus. Now, that's a big perk and plus with this camera. And I actually was looking forward to autofocus coming from the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera that has no autofocus, which I'm used to that because I love manual focus. But Doing videos like this of myself, it's hard for me to manual focus and to, get that exact sharp focus when I can only manual focus. So that's one of the things I was looking. One of the reasons why I like the autofocus. Also for weddings and on a gimbal, I use the autofocus. So it wasn't mandatory for me, but it's definitely a big bonus and a perk. And it has face only mode and face priority, which are big features within the autofocus, which is really good. It has time code as well. Like this is like a pro feature that they put in, again, this mirrorless size cinema camera. So that's I think that's a big perk that they included an actual time code port for this cinema camera. All right, and again, so I do want to talk about the processor. The processor, I mean, it's the whole reason why this camera can shoot 8K on a full frame sensor, and at that it can record RAW internally up to 60 frames per second with no crop, and then also you can record 4K 120p super slow motion with no crop, and then also that you can still record that in 422 10-bit. Not only that, but you can still record that in all intra frame rate, giving you the most information and bit rate. Is all due to the processor in this cinema camera. You can view all the exposure tools I was talking about earlier, like the false color, the waveform, the zebras, the focus peaking. You can view all of these on the actual monitor all at the same time. Now, I did a review with the EOS R8, which I used a couple of times. And you can actually only use one of these features at a time. And then miscellaneous things that you have to appreciate as well is that you can adjust noise reduction in this EOS R5C. Compared to the Sony, you cannot adjust the noise reduction in that camera, but you can adjust your noise reduction in this camera. You can adjust the fan speed. You can't turn off the fan, but you can adjust the fan speed in standby mode and in recording mode. So a plus to that. Other miscellaneous, it has 13 assignable buttons on the body. Let's talk about the cons. I know this is like something that a lot of people want to know right off the back. Like what is the bad side about this camera? What are the cons? So let's talk about those. And really, to be honest, some of these are really like perspective or preference. But so the first con, let's go ahead and talk about the elephant in the room, the battery life. Okay. Yes, the battery life in this camera is not good at all. But again, I came from the Blackmagic Pocket 6K Pro, and a lot of people have had or still have that camera because it's an awesome camera. Regardless of that battery life was terrible. Now, so jumping from that camera to this camera, I hear everybody talking about the battery life. I'm like, hey man, I'm used to that because I'm coming from the 6K Pro, and to be honest, this camera, brand new, was $4,300. Okay, the market that this camera was marketed to was cinematographers and DPs that were on a budget. So most of those people are, rigging their cameras up, and they use V-mount batteries. So, and then not only that, but it's a $4,300 camera. I mean, I'm not really going to rely on an internal battery, let alone me rigging it up. So it's not really a con for me. But the next one is the raw file sizes. I hear a lot of people complaining about the file raw sizes. Now, to a lot of people, this is a con. I was actually shocked about this because, the camera, again, is $4,300. You're getting 8K RAW. Again, this is marketed to filmmakers and those solo video producers who, want really super high quality and detailed images. So yes, the file sizes are huge. And this, I wouldn't say it's a con, but it is kind of like a like a negative compared to Blackmagic Raw, because I had the 6K Pro. Blackmagic Raw had way more compression options where you can kind of, choose better your file sizes. So Blackmagic Raw has constant quality, which has 5 compressions in that mode, and then it has constant, I think it's constant bit rate, which is another 5 modes. So you have 10 raw recording bit rates or formats with Blackmagic Raw, whereas in this Canon R5C, you really only have 3. You have raw LT, raw ST, and then you have raw HQ, but the raw HQ is only in the Super 35 crop mode. All right, the IBIS, in-body image stabilization. To a lot of people, they were disappointed about this part, and it's a con for them. It's not really a con for me. And I think for other filmmakers who, they're in video producers and that have a production company, that have stabilizers, that have cinema dolly sliders, that have maybe a crane, that have like a camera stabilizer mount on their cars and stuff like that. They're professionally stabilizing this Canon EOS R5C for their professional work. So to be honest, like the IBIS is really marketed to like videographers who want to just be like run and gun and on the go, and maybe they're not doing high production work. So this camera, again, is the R5C cinema camera. I mean, the R5 had IBIS because it's a hybrid camera, whereas this is a cinema camera. So I can understand why Canon didn't put the IBIS in this camera. Then you have the mini HDMI. Okay, mini HDMI. Honestly, y'all not gonna believe me, but to this day, I do not own an external monitor. Even when my last camera, the 6K Pro Blackmagic, it didn't need a monitor. It was 5-inch built-in LCD on a camera. No other cinema camera has that, and I missed that very much. So I'm back to like a 3.2 inch with the R5C, but I never needed a external monitor, so I'm not really about the HDMI life. Now I think I will get one just to be a production monitor for my client, so they can view the actual live recording, away from the camera. But again, I think this is preference. But to be honest, a lot of professionals do use the HDMI out, so maybe they have a good valid reason to complain about the mini HDMI. Okay. C-Log 2. Another complaint was that this camera does not come with C-Log 2, and they use the word cripple. The C70 has C-Log 2. The C300 Mark III has C-Log 2. Yes, I would have liked C-Log 2 in this camera. And I think it's the reason why the dynamic range is capped in this camera, because it only has C-Log 3, giving us 13.6 stops of dynamic range, more or less. Yes, but the odd thing about it is that if you shoot 8K RAW, you can convert your footage to either C-Log 3 or C-Log 2. So it's like the camera doesn't have C-Log 2, but if you shoot 8K RAW, you can get C-Log 2. The C-Log 2 is noisy in this camera. I'm not sure how much noisier it is in the C70, but it is noisy, but it's worth like the extra detail and flexibility. And actually, I'm going to do another video just talking about the wedding that I shot in all 8K RAW C-Log 2. Big pros. There are some small cons. So if you want to know more about the 8K RAW and the C-Log 2, I'm going to do that video as well. All right, so real quick, let's check out some comparisons that the R5C was compared with. And a lot of people say that the Canon R5C or just in Canon cameras in general are crippled. But let's really check out let's really compare apples with apples. So you have the Canon R5C, then you have Sony. Okay, so Sony doesn't have shutter angle. Sony doesn't have false color. Yes, they got some firmware updates that's about to bring that, but this R5C, two years old, out the box, comes with false color, comes with shutter angle. Not only that, but it records RAW internally. Again, none of the Sony cinema cameras under $6,000 gives you internal RAW. You have to record RAW externally with a external recorder. That's the FX6, $6,000, FX3, $3,900, A7S3, $3,500. All three of them do not record RAW internally. Who else? Compare the Panasonic S52X was compared with the R5C. The price of the S52X is unbeatable, $2,200. But when they compare this with that and say that the Canon's cripple, well, there's a couple of things I'd like to bring up. So the S52X, the reason why I chose this over the S52X is that one, the S52X, when you shoot it in its 5.9K codecs, it's 420 sample 10-bit, whereas with the R5C, I can get 422 10-bit in all of its codecs. That's one. Number two, with the S52X, when you're shooting 4K, anything over 30p, any frame rate higher than 30p is cropped to a Super 35 sensor. So that's 4K, 48p, 4K, 60p. They're cropped to a Super 35. You're not even getting full frame field of view, full frame format out of the S52X. And so, the S52X is more so crippled than the R5C. Not only that, but the S52X, again, does not shoot RAW internally. It can only shoot RAW externally. That means every time you want to shoot RAW to get that more, that flexibility of RAW, which I love, you have to throw a external monitor on top of there, external monitor / recorder. And that brings me to another thing, how a lot of people say the Canon cameras are crippled. The R5C is still coming with a mini HDMI. And a lot of, people are mad about that. But you want to throw an external monitor on top of the R5C, which is not going to stay in its small mirrorless format size anymore. But then they're complaining about the R5C battery life being bad, and you have to add a V-mount, therefore building it up, and it's not going to be small again. But you want to put an external monitor on it with a full-size HDMI. So as you can see, that the Canon R5C is not really crippled when you compare it to its competition. Another competition is the Blackmagic Pocket, not the Blackmagic Pocket, but the Blackmagic, the full frame cinema camera, and the Pixis. You can shoot open gate, which is awesome for social media, but that open gate resolution and codec, the fastest frame rate is like 36 frames per second. Me myself, I need 60p at least or more, because I want to use slow motion. So when you really compare this camera with others and you try to make your choice, you really need to consider what you want to get out of your cinema camera. Do you want oversample 4K by getting 6K or 8K sensor that's giving you more detail and sharpness? Or do you care more about the low light? Sony has that low light on lock, but it's just a straight 4K sensor output. Do you want faster frame rates? The Sonys do give you 120p, but the Blackmagics doesn't have the frame rates. Panasonic, the the S52X doesn't have the frame rate. The GH6 does, but you know, do you want more professional tools like false color, shutter angle? Sony doesn't have those. Now I heard that they're coming out with a firmware update, but you know, this is like years later. The FX6 is what, like 4 years? I could be wrong, but 4 years old. So that's cool. But I mean, the R5C right out of the box, you're getting all of this professional cinema tools. And I purchased the Canon EOS R5C. And there are some recommendations that I have for you. So I purchased this camera on the sale of $3,600. However, there are a few things that I needed that were mandatory for me to get as soon as I bought this, which make the price go up just a little bit more, that you should know. So the first thing is media. You're gonna have to upgrade your media when you get this camera, especially if you're coming from, you know, a 6K resolution camera. Even worse, just a straight 4K cinema camera. Even if it's 4K RAW, like the 8K RAW and a 4K 120, you're gonna need to upgrade your media. With that being said, I ended up purchasing, first of all, I didn't have any CF Express Type Bs, so this was a new media format for me as well, coming from the 6K Pro. So I ended up buying a 2 terabyte CF Express Type B card that was $400, and that's the most expensive I ever spent on media. But it was mandatory for me because I purchased this camera and I am going to shoot 8K RAW. Spend a little bit extra money just so I can record at least 2 hours of RAW. So if I wanted to record a wedding, which I did in RAW, I can. Or if I want to shoot a film, short film or documentary, and I want to shoot it in RAW for the benefit of that flexibility and C-Log 2, I had to upgrade my media. Another thing you're going to need to upgrade or think about upgrading is I had to also purchase a 2 terabyte solid state drive to handle the speed that you need for this 8K RAW. I needed an external SSD to connect to my computer that's fast enough that can, first of all, I can space-wise, I can download all that high big files of 8K RAW too, but also fast enough to read it when I'm editing on DaVinci Resolve. Another thing is, and this is the big deal, your computer. I know this is like the last thing we think about when we buy a new camera, but me jumping from the 6K Blackmagic RAW, which again, I think the Blackmagic RAW is the best RAW, but jumping to this 8K Canon Cinema RAW Lite, it really taxed my my editing workstation laptop. I mean, my laptop has an 8 gigabyte NVIDIA Studio processor, graphics processor, and it was like editing my 6K RAW from my Blackmagic 6K Pro like butter. But this 8K RAW with 2 layers of color grading, and what really like put it in the grade was that noise reduction, because that C-Log 2 is noisy. Whew. You're going to need to think about upgrading your computer, okay? Being a mirrorless body cinema camera and it does not have any ND filters, my 6K Pro had built-in ND filters. And it's true, once you have a camera with built-in ND filters, it's hard to go back. The RF to EF adapter with built-in variable ND filter, 10 stops, I think it's 10 stops or 10 plus stops of ND variable stops was paramount for me. And so I purchased this one, and I used it the whole time I filmed this wedding with my EF Cinema Prime glass, and I controlled my exposure. Another thing I recommend is at least having one RF lens for your cinematography and video production. Now, me particularly, I've always been a fan of cinema glass, which is no autofocus, no data at all. Me using this camera for photography, I need an RF autofocus lens, but even for video production, I find it very beneficial because the dual pixel autofocus is a big benefit, number one. Number two, the RF lenses do have built-in stabilization that you can use. That's number two. And then number three, if you want a manual focus with your RF autofocus lens for your video work, there is what's called focus guide. And it's just another way to nail your focus, like focus peaking. But this is a big feature only for a lens that has autofocus. So these are three benefits of why you should definitely get you a RF lens, at least one, because they're expensive. Last but not least, and this should have been the first thing, of course, you're going to have to get you some V-mount batteries if you don't already have some, being a cinematographer and video producer. V-mount batteries, and then I also recommend this wall mount charger that I purchased is by Lenovo, and it converts it. You can use it on our EOS R5C in the power delivery format, and it will charge your camera, you know, as long as you need it, because it plugs into an outlet. So I definitely recommend this. This was like $36, so very cheap, but very important. So with all that being said, in summary, I'm telling you the truth, where I really love this Canon EOS cinema camera. I mean, this camera is highly professional, and it's really feature proof. I mean, 8K full frame with excellent low light and shoots internal RAW. There's a lot of other manufacturers that's like producing cameras that's just getting to the specs that this camera outputs. So this is the reason why I chose it. I love this camera for my professional work. I believe I will have it for a couple years. Please leave anything in the comments that I did not cover. I will definitely answer your questions. Thank you for sticking in there and really just taking a listen to my perspective of my experience review of this awesome camera that is, I'm glad to say, my very own purchased a camera, and I hope to see you guys in the next couple of videos. Subscribe so you don't miss out. God bless y'all. Talk to y'all later. Peace.